All right, part three of the Louisiana series is here. As usual, I'll put a summary article below the video for anyone who doesn't want to sit through the whole video. That's totally fine. You can read the article in a couple minutes. As always, reach out to us if you have any questions. If you want to help beta test this product that I'll be showcasing, we're still looking for beta testers. Getting closer and closer to a full release of this, so look for that in the upcoming couple months. Um, yeah, so without further ado, I will go to the map view and we can take a look at Louisiana. I'll just do a quick review of what we talked about in part one and part two. Really, the thesis of this is Louisiana should be broken up and viewed from three different buckets or three different markets, three different separate markets. So, market one will be the southwest corner, which contains three refineries. Bucket two is going to be the northwest corner and including southern Arkansas. And then bucket three is going to be the southeast part of Louisiana, which has the big refineries in it. And that's the part we're going to be talking about today. Um, but just a quick review of part one. We talked about how these three refineries are largely fed by pipelines moving this way. We highlighted the Citgo pipeline, which is expanding and feeding the Citgo refinery here. And we talked about Bayou Bridge and Zydeco, which also feed refineries in this area, and how the impact of the Citgo expansion could impact these refineries down the road. In part two, we talked about this area up here and really how Plains kind of has control of this market with Energy Transfer potentially stepping in and potentially with some of their pipelines maybe stepping in to compete a little bit. We'll see how that goes over the next year or so, or if they're really trying to do that. But really, Plains and Energy Transfer are the players here. Plains with their JV pipelines with Delek, which is the biggest refinery here in this second bucket. It's in southern Arkansas. The JVs that they have for Cushing coming down, the Red River pipeline that they have, the Plains and Delek JV of Red River, and then the JV they have on Cato coming across here. So that controls a lot of the barrels coming into this box. But not all of them. And even Delek's refinery here appears to be indirectly fed by some Energy Transfer pipes as well. So this one, today we're going to talk about this area here, and really the highlight of this area, and I'll show kind of a rough balance of this area. Just this area. This won't be all of Louisiana. I just did like a rough balance of this area to give everyone an idea of the supply and demand dynamics that occur here. This is really highlighted by really big refineries in this area. So the two big ones are going to be ExxonMobil's Baton Rouge refinery, and then if you go down here, it's Marathon's Garyville refinery. Between those two, it's over 1.1 million barrels a day of refining capacity. And then you have some medium-sized refineries as well. So Valero's Norco refinery, Shell's Norco refinery here. PBF has a medium-sized refinery. Valero has another refinery there. So let's switch over to the balance really quick. And this again is just the rough balance for that area. So as I've alluded to in some of the other part videos, the offshore production is a really big deal here. So I'm going to switch back to the map really quick and just highlight that. The offshore production from here feeds the majority of the crude oil going into these refineries. So this is a really big deal, and I'll toggle back so you can see what it is. But 1.4 million barrels a day. Let me clear this out. 1.4 million barrels a day of offshore production going into a refinery demand of 1.8 million. Remember I said Exxon and Marathon's Garyville are over 1.1 of that, but those other medium-sized refineries and small refineries add up to quite a bit. So you have 1.8 to 1.9 million barrels a day of refining demand in this third box or third area. and that has to be filled by some supply of crude oil, and the majority of that crude oil is the offshore production. So offshore production in the Gulf is about 1.8 million barrels a day total for the U.S. So about 1.4 of that is going straight into Louisiana. The rest is largely going into Texas. There's a little bit that goes, I believe, up into Mississippi or Alabama. But the majority is going to be in Louisiana. So this is an important number, and we'll talk about this a little bit later. But when you're thinking about the balance, the two biggest pieces and the most important pieces are going to be the offshore production piece and the refinery piece. Those two closely match each other, and to the extent that they don't, they're being balanced out by some other areas. So there is a little bit of onshore production. Again, depending on where you draw your box, that can be anywhere from 50,000 to 70,000 barrels a day. But the state of Louisiana is about 80,000 barrels a day of production. Some of that's up to the north, like we talked about in part two. I used just a rough figure of 60,000 barrels a day in kind of this southeast area. That helps also feed those refinery inputs. So what else do we have left? Import and exports are surprising. They kind of offset each other, and we'll look at those here in a minute. And we also have the pipes. The pipes are important. They aren't a big piece of this pie, but as we've seen recently with Enbridge and Energy Transfer trying to target some Louisiana refineries with their Southern Illinois Connector project, feeding more heavy barrels into this area, if they were to shove more barrels into this area, that has to be offset by something. So the refinery would take less imports, or you would see more exports of some of the offshore. Instead of going into the refineries, it would be exported. But this is kind of the balance that we're looking at. Big time offshore production feeding the refinery units, and then the marginal demand that needs to be filled is largely being filled by onshore pipelines. So let's take a quick look at let's look at the onshore pipelines one by one, and the puts and takes there. Most of them are adding supply, but there are some taking away. There's one taking away. So let's toggle back to the portal here. So helping feed that marginal the marginal supply when we take the 1.4 million barrels from the offshore and push that into Louisiana, we still have a little bit of excess demand. So we need to feed that with the pipelines. So we'll go one by one here, and we'll start with Zydeco. And we talked about this in part one because it does feed these refineries here, but the barrels continue onto this pipeline and further into Louisiana. So just looking at this flow point past Lake Charles, you see it's about let's say 150 to 200,000 barrels a day, peaking up of about 250,000 barrels a day some months. So quite a bit of this excess piece of supply after you add in the offshore and onshore is fed by this Zydeco pipeline, and this is largely light barrels that are coming down this pipeline, I believe. What else is feeding it? Let's look at Bayou Bridge. So I highlighted this also in part one because it does feed a large amount of the oil that flows through this pipeline gets left in the Lake Charles area at the Phillips 66 refinery here, and there is a little bit that goes further on. So as you can see, it appears that this pipeline or this section of pipeline is significantly underutilized at just over not even 100,000 barrels a day in some months. So this, if we go back to the Southern Illinois Connector project, which I talked about in the prior video, this is probably one of the reasons that Energy Transfer wants to feed this pipeline and get some more heavy barrels down to this system, is they probably believe they can displace some imports or displace some offshore production with some of this cheap heavy oil from Canada, and they're trying to fill this pipeline, which it appears has just a gob of capacity once you get past Lake Charles. Pre-Lake Charles, it looks a little bit better, obviously, but a lot of those volumes are left in the Lake Charles area, and you just don't have very many volumes making their way to the St. James area. So between Zydeco and this, let's call it 300,000 barrels a day of extra supply coming in. You also have supply coming in from a couple other corridors. So let's talk about Permian Express really quick. So Permian Express is taking, this is probably light Permian barrels. The tariff on this pipeline is a joint tariff that runs, it's a Permian Express Lola tariff that runs all the way from Midland, and then comes down to Anchorage to feed the Exxon refinery here. And this is around 100,000 barrels a day, a little over 100,000 barrels a day flow through this pipeline. So between Zydeco, Bayou Bridge, Permian Express, we're at about 400,000 barrels a day of additional supply. And then let's clear this out and let's take a look at Capline, the last ingress pipeline that we have feeding this area. I'm sure most of you know the story about how this was reversed a few years ago. So you can see the flows that used to flow north on it. Now these are the flows that come in, flowing south. Again, another pipe that has a little bit or a nice chunk of capacity still open on it. So today we're at like a little less than 150,000 with 300,000 barrels a day of capacity. So certainly an area where if they could find some more heavy barrels up in the Midwest and can shove them down here, that would be something they would very much like to do. But at 150, what are we at? 500 to 550 of pipe supply. Now, if we toggle back to our onshore pipe net, you see it's only 370. So why the difference? The difference is we have one pipe that's taking barrels out of this area, and that's Chevron's pipeline. So this is a line that feeds their Pascagoula refinery from their Empire terminal here. So you can see this is what's leaving the area. So over 150, close to 200,000 barrels a day. The expansion or the capacity on this pipe was disclosed several years ago. It looks like they probably have expanded it since then. So as you can see, it does flow over the capacity, anywhere from 150 to 200,000. So you net all that out. I said we had around 500 to 550 coming in. You have what, 200 ish coming out. What was that number? 150 to 200 ish coming out. You net it out, you get the 370 that we have here. So what's important to think about here, and we'll go back to the offshore production really quick, is this 1.4 million barrels a day number. And I thought the EIA actually did a pretty good piece on the upcoming offshore production that's coming online. Now, full disclosure here, I don't model in production. I don't do production. That's not something I've ever done. I'm not an expert at it. I've never done it. I don't know how good the EIA is at modeling offshore production. It's certainly an area that's maybe a little bit tougher than regular onshore production, given the wells are really big and probably you don't have a lot to go off of as far as comparable declines on a lot of these wells. So take this with a grain of salt as much as you trust the EIA to do this. The EIA had basically listed out all the projects that are coming online, and as you can see, the dark area is going to be the natural declines, and then the light area is the new wells coming online or the new projects coming online. So looking at this is interesting. If we look at the offshore production, we could be like, okay, we go back to our balance and say we expect this to be 1.4 million barrels a day to stay pretty flat. Well, that's probably not actually true, because if we look at where these barrels are actually going to end up, go back to the balance again. Offshore production from the Gulf is about 1.8 million barrels a day, and you can see it in this chart too, roughly 1.8 million barrels a day. 1.4 million barrels a day of that goes into Louisiana. The rest goes into Texas and a little bit into Alabama and Mississippi, I think. But as we look forward to the projects coming online here in this year, 2025, and next year in 2026, the vast majority of those projects are going into pipelines that'll feed into Texas and not Louisiana. So you actually have likely will be facing declines of offshore production going into Louisiana if you're to the extent that you believe the EIA numbers and believe their modeling, if the whole Gulf is flat and we have a lot of the barrels of the new barrels going into Texas, it stands to reason that we'll probably see some declines in Louisiana over the next couple years. So that's important to think about because the marginal barrel is going to be fed by these pipelines or some other like waterborne exports or something like that coming into Louisiana. So to the extent that I reduce, go back to my balance, to the extent that offshore production goes to 1.25 million barrels, like we have an imbalance here, as you can see here. So this will need to be fed by something else. Unless a refinery goes offline, we won't get that. There could be shifts in imports and exports. That's certainly possible. I don't expect onshore production to do anything but probably slightly drop. So this will have to be fed by onshore pipelines. So which pipelines are going to win that? Well, we'll see. We do have some clues with like Enbridge and Energy Transfer targeting heavy barrels into Louisiana with their Southern Illinois Connector project. That probably makes some sense given the dynamics we're seeing with the offshore, with most of the new project barrels ending up in Texas. This probably leads to declines in the offshore in Louisiana. So that's kind of the way that we're thinking through the Louisiana piece, and certainly something to keep an eye on, and keep an eye on the production. We'll be adding some helpful data to that hopefully within the next few months to better get a better look at what the offshore production piece looks like. So stay tuned for that. Again, thanks for joining. I really enjoyed this Louisiana overview. Maybe we'll go in and talk about a little bit more about in the next one about who could best win the new capacity that needs to come into Louisiana and feed the refineries if we're to see an offshore production decline. Maybe we'll do one like that. But for now, I think that's enough for Louisiana Part 3. Again, thanks for joining and have a great day.